There we go. Okay, there we go. We are live, and I remembered to check the audio stream. Okay. Oolale, oolale. Okay. I'll shut off some lights here. We're going to get going. All right. So, okay. All right. Sorry, my head's a little... I just finished doing what's called a teaching demonstration because I'm applying for a job in the department as a tenure track professor, and it's nerve-wracking, and so my head is a little in a funny space. Okay, I guess we'll start. So obviously, last week we were talking about religion, and I said, it's going to be our last topic because we really only have Wednesday's class, and then Friday is supposed to be review. If we get done with religion today, we'll just call it early. And maybe we'll do review on Wednesday, and then we'll see on Friday if people still want to do stuff. But we won't add any more content to your already stressful lives. Okay, so this was a question. I left this up last week, so this is from last week. If you still haven't seen your exam for SOC 100, I have a lot of stuff going on this week, but, oh, thank you. This is my interview close. I don't have a ton of time this week. Tomorrow, I'll be around the office. I have meetings kind of at different points in the day. But if you want to come in and take a look at your exam, shoot me an email. I'll tell you whether the time you have in mind works or not. And we'll try to fit you in. Worst comes to worst, Friday afternoon, I'll stick around until, later in the day, 3:30, 4 o'clock, to make sure that I'm getting everybody who wants a chance. And if we have to go into the week after, right, I'm on campus all the time anyway. We can do that. Yes, okay. Sorry, why am I looking over there? I can look over here. Oh, some stuff fries my brain. Will the materials for the final be everything covered after the midterm? Yes, so the exam is non-cumulative, right? So everything that we covered up to, the end of midterm 2, that's all gone. You don't have to worry about that. So it's just everything since then. And I will, like I've done with the other topics, right? I'll put up a review video that covers the topics we covered, since then, and all of that fun stuff. And like I said, my brain's a little scrambled, but when I come on Wednesday, I will have that all ready for you, and I'll have a Kahoot quiz, and we'll do Q&A and all of that stuff. But yeah, it's all non-cumulative, so just whatever till the end of the course. Alrighty, so I suppose we can begin. So I guess we ended off last class talking about a couple of things, right? So we outlined, one of the kind of leading theories of religion that has tried to explain how religion works, right? So this is Stark's market theory, right? Or religious economies. Stark's market theory, right? And this idea that religion is like a marketplace, right? That basically, there are religious firms selling products, and they're trying to drum up demand. And then there are religious buyers who might be interested in religious products under the right conditions. And market theory, instead of being like, why do people need religion? Is it because their lives suck? They don't have enough bread? Is more like, what do religions do to generate demand? And then, we talked about how, you have either religious free markets or religious monopolies. Religious free markets, like the United States, tend to be really, really dynamic religiously, right? There's a lot of energy, and people tend to stay more religious, versus religious monopolies, places more like Europe, which tend to be sort of dominated by one religion, and those religions tend to be more lethargic, right? The more different kinds of religion you have, according to Stark, the more demand grows. Okay. And then we ended off, kind of introducing the idea of what's called the secularization thesis. And the secularization thesis basically has been the dominant paradigm in sociology since the beginning. And it's the idea that basically, religious institutions, actions, and consciousness are on the decline and will one day disappear altogether. And the culprit here is mostly, I said last time, modernity. Modernity, and specifically things like, where do I have it? Rationalization. Rationalism, science rationalism, cause a decline in religious authority, and therefore religion should disappear. And I mean, this has been, like I said, this basically runs from the beginning of the field, in the middle part of the 19th century, and is the dominant paradigm at least until the 1990s. At which point it gets reconsidered because everybody was like, by this point, and certainly by 2000, religion should be gone, and religion is still doing fine, right? There are still lots of religious people, even in highly modern societies like the US. Weirdly, there's like a random electrical cable sticking out, and I'm mildly concerned. Okay, so as I said last time, right, in 1998, Peter Berger, who had been I talked about him last time, right? Peter Berger, who had been one of the strongest advocates of secularization. His sacred canopy theory is a secularization theory. Basically put out a paper essentially saying that all of this thought that religion was going to be gone by the 21st century, that modernization was inherently linked to secularization, right? Modernization was going to cause secularization, so the more modern the world got, the more people's material needs were met, the more religion would simply disappear. And he says, basically, we got this wrong. We assumed a much too strong of a link between modernization and secularization. And then in 1999, my buddy, Rodney Stark, I really do love him for weird reasons. My pen is like at a weird angle. I don't know what's going on. 1999. So Stark writes a very famous piece in the journal Sociology of Religion, so the leading journal of religion. So this is the leading journal in Soc of Religion, and he writes a piece called Secularization Rest in peace. Stark has never been an advocate of the secularization thesis, and so he takes to his platform and the most prominent journal in the field to basically say the adult and professional sociologist version of nana, 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 you were all wrong, I was right, you're all dumb, I'm real smart. And it's actually a tour de force. It's one of the best articles that you can ever read because it's basically him just taking revenge on all of his competitors and all the people who thought he was wrong, because he's an advocate of what's called self-limiting secularization. The idea that the world will get a little bit secular and then religion will kind of come roaring back as religious firms react to the conditions in the market. Okay. Now, not everybody shares Stark's kind of secularization is dead kind of thesis. I'm going to clear this off so I can write some more. And other people basically are like, okay, something is clearly different, right? We're not at the point in history anymore where religion dominates everything, right? The church is no longer at the center of community life, right? Religion is no longer central to everybody's experiences or anything like that. So clearly something in the world has changed, right? Religion is no longer as prominent as it once was. So what's going on? And they come up, and particularly a guy named Mark Chavez, and he's at the University of Notre Dame, basically starts to try and come up with a framework for rethinking secularization. And they call it either the neo-secularization, depending on who you talk to, it's either called neo-secularization or the revised secularization thesis. And basically, it's just a recognition that, basically the secularization thesis can't be entirely correct, but these differences have to be explained somehow, right? The church is just one institution amongst many, right? If you went back to the beginning of the 20th century, the church was much more dominant. It controlled schools and hospitals and all sorts of social institutions, the social welfare system. And by the 21st century, right, it doesn't do that anymore. So they say, okay, clearly something has changed. And they basically say it's, diminishing authority. That secularization, instead of being about religion disappearing, is actually about diminishing religious authority, right? So basically, it still exists, but people pay attention to it much less. And they say that this happens at 3 levels. So the macro, and they call this, so institutional differentiation, right? So differentiation. And it's exactly what I was just talking about, right? Once the church ran the schools, once the church ran the hospitals, right? If you go back, when my mom was born in 1953, and she was born in a hospital in rural Alberta run by nuns, right? And so, her and her 9 sisters, a big French-Canadian family, technically, if you look at their birth certificates, it's Mary. My mom's name is, on her birth certificate is Mary Martha Rondo. So, but her actual name is not Mary, right? But that they put it on everything because the nuns ran the hospitals, and so it was like, okay, the nuns ran the hospital, so every girl was Mary, every boy was Joseph, and then your given name or your Christian name was put after that. That obviously doesn't happen anymore, right? There's no nuns running hospitals anymore. There's no nuns really running schools anymore. There are still Catholic schools, but they're not run directly by the Catholic Church for the most part. So we've had differentiation, right? The social welfare system, right? Child protective services and all that, and giving food to the needy, right? This is not, broadly speaking, done by churches. So we've had a differentiation of institutions at the big societal level. All right, at the meso level. So meso means literally in between, right? So when you stand on, if you're in a building and you're on the mezzanine, that is the floor in between floors is literally what it means. So at the meso level, so between, the macro and the micro, so between, the big and the personal, there's this meso level. And Chavez says even, formerly religious institutions, often religious considerations are secondary to them. And I think, though this isn't his example, a good example of this is University of Notre Dame. So University of Notre Dame is, technically speaking, a Catholic university in Indiana. Great school. Go Fighting Irish. Some of my favorite sociologists are there. Christian Smith is there. Anyway, Notre Dame, right? Catholic school. The president is a Catholic priest from an order of priests that basically runs that school. That's neither here nor there. But a few years ago, there was a very Catholic group on campus put out a petition to ban pornography from the school Wi-Fi system. That basically the school would block by default any pornographic website. And it went up all the way to the Board of Governors and the Board of Governors. Now, pornography, not the Catholic Church's favorite thing, right? The Catholic Church wildly disapproves of pornography. But when it went up to the Board of Governors, they said no, because it was a free speech issue, right? Ability to access porn is a free speech issue in the US. It always makes me laugh a little. So, for even an institution that says it is religious, right? That's, Notre Dame, Our Lady, refers to the Virgin Mary. Religious considerations were secondary to its mission. So there was that. And okay, the last one at the micro level, right? Micro level, so people's personal choices, right? So this is personal choices. How much do people think about religion when they're making their personal choices? And one of the things that Chavez kind of points to is the fact that, okay, again, we're going to use a Catholic Church example because this is what Chavez uses, and I think it's a good one. Birth control. My pen is laggy. I don't know why. Birth control. The Catholic Church officially, to this day, has a prohibition against Roman Catholics using birth control. For all sorts of reasons, not worth getting into. But one of the things that Chavez says is, we know that there's secularization at the micro level because when we poll them, 98% of Catholic women who are married admit to using contraception at some point in their lives, right? So regardless of what the Catholic Church says, people are making their decision not on religious grounds, but on the grounds of something else, right? Economic, psychological, right? Some, they don't want to have kids because they're stressed out or because they can't afford them, but they're not making, choices because of their religion. They're making it for other reasons. And so we know that even at the level of their consciousness, religion and their religion is not the first thing on their minds, right? So what he says is we've had this, basically secularization at these different levels. That doesn't mean that, people who reject, Catholics who reject contraception aren't still religious. They are. Just that they're making decisions, their personal decisions are not necessarily based on religious considerations. Okay, hopefully that all makes sense. Stopped at a red light this weekend at 3 a.m. Thought of me and Foucault and decided to run it. Thank you. You're welcome. See, I've helped you to resist the internalization of your own repression. So if nothing else, Intro to Sociology helped this one person save 2.5 minutes. So, you can't say no one got anything out of this class. Okay. One person ran a red light. Now, I hope they didn't get a photo radar, but who knows? Okay, so one of the other theories, and I'll just outline this really quickly. I kind of said it a second ago. One of the other theories of secularization is what's called self-limiting. And this again is Rodney Stark. Self-limiting secularization. And this is basically like, an admission that, there are periods in history where the world gets less religious, right? Where religion loses its luster. And what Stark thinks is really happening is old religions get boring. And new religions that were once kind of new and interesting, they grow old and they too get boring. And he has lots of cool examples of this in a book called, which I won't write down, but it's called The Churching of America, 1776 to 2005, Winners and Losers in Our Religious Economy. And it's a really cool and really fun book if you're into sociology of religion, which clearly I am. And what Stark says is, there's this constant kind of process. Different ways of doing religion get old and they get uninteresting and they start to get overly institutionalized and bureaucratized, and people lose interest and start to move away. Now, what'll typically happen, according to Stark, especially in a free market, is you get the rise of two things. You get the rise of sects and new religious movements. So a sect is basically a group that breaks away from an established religion, typically because, a disagreement about doctrine or ways of doing things, and they're generally less integrated into society than larger religious institutions. So you can have all sorts of sects, right? There are Christian sects, there are Jewish sects, there are, Muslim sects, all these, any kind of religion has these kind of breakaways. And basically what Stark says is they do this to become more relevant, right? They want to meet the challenges of the day. Okay, so basically, right, you might have, and this is what Stark says happened in the 19th century. You went through these three historical periods in Britain and in the United States called the three great revivals, right, or great awakenings, where basically new forms of Christianity popped up. You got the growth of the Baptists, the Methodists, and a whole bunch of others that did things a little bit differently. They had more contemporary music. Their preachers were more charismatic, often less trained, and all of that stuff. And we've seen that kind of in the contemporary period as well in Christianity with Pentecostals, right? If you've ever been to, have any experience with Pentecostals, a lot of people don't have any experience with religion at all, but Pentecostals are the wild kind of sect of Christianity. They speak in tongues, right? They'll spew what sounds like gibberish. They say it's heavenly speech. They pass out from the ecstasy of the Holy Spirit. They sing crazy charismatic songs. That's the Pentecostals. It's a sect that's grown up. And, it went from, let's say, how shall we say, 0 in 1900 to, somewhere around 700 million today. So Pentecostalism has grown, especially in Africa and Latin America. Okay, so that's a sect, right? They're still Christian, they're still following Christianity basically, but they, differ with some doctrines. They created some of their own doctrines, and they are typically charismatic and in line with the culture. All right, and then you have the group that everyone always wants to ask me about when we talk about this, which is new religious movements, or our friends, the cults. And basically, these are typically, headed by charismatic leaders, unique religious vision that rejects mainstream culture and society. And, if they last long enough, well, maybe I'll go to the next slide. Well, I'll say, let's put it this way. Mormons, right, or Latter-day Saints, again, sorry if you're Mormon, I'm not making fun of you, but I'm just, from a sociological perspective, this is what you were. Mormons started out in the 19th century as a new religious movement, right? Joseph Smith had his kind of unique religious ideas, right? He claimed a unique revelation from God, that he received the Book of Mormon on golden tablets. Anyway, I'm not here to make fun of Mormonism or anything like that. Scientology, right, would also be, everyone always wants to know about Scientology. They're dying now, but Scientology is a new religious movement as well, right? One that's done reasonably well. Mormons were a new religious movement, and new religious movements pop up all the time. There was one in kind of the west coast of the US and Canada called NXIVM, which was a sex cult. And weirdly, recently, I don't know why, I'm really much more aware of sex-based new religious movements, especially where sex with the founder is a particularly core piece of the religious identity. And there was one that was operating locally a few years ago that I had a student who had escaped from this new religious movement. And one of the tenets was you had to have sex with the founder, and all women, of course, in a sarcophagus, right? Like an ancient Egyptian sarcophagus. And it was the weirdest thing. But they're popping up all the time. Okay, let's talk about new religious movements. And I think I'm almost done. Oh, I got a few more. Okay. So sects and new religious movements tend to experience three outcomes. Most of them, this is 99%, disappear. And the time frame here for their disappearance is somewhere around 30 to 40 years at the maximum. Some collapse faster than that, but the relatively successful ones tend to last somewhere around 30 to 40 years. Because almost inevitably, new religious movements tend to be apocalyptic in nature, right? They're announcing the end of the world is coming, and they make predictions about the end of the world. And if the end of the world doesn't come, then people leave, right? Because they're like, oh, this guy's just a huckster. It didn't actually happen. Bye-bye. So most new religious movements fail. And most new religious movements will fail within 30 to 40 years. Whoever that first generation of people, the most passionate followers of new religious movements, they tend to realize after about 30 or 40 years, again, sometimes less, that the whole thing is a bit of a fraud, and they take off. And then the whole thing collapses as that most committed generation sort of falls away. Okay, so very few of them go beyond that. Some, a small percentage, and this is true of sects as well, persist and start to become more like what we think of as a church, a more standard religion, right? Or religious kind of denomination, right? So you go from, the Baptists go from being a sect in the 19th century to a mainstream church in the 20th, right? And then, if they last long enough, they will become highly institutionalized and probably eventually start to decline as well. So 99%. And one thing I want to say is new religious movements are being born all the time. And there are weird kind of historical and geographic patterns to it. We've probably had 15 pretty strong new religious movements birthed out of South Korea. I know I said this before. South Korea, for whatever reason, is a weird hotbed of new religious movements. There's a couple of them operating in Edmonton. And honestly, if you just kind of watch, you go over past the Telus Center towards the Earls. There's on occasion this one guy, he has glasses, really nice haircut, and a gray kind of peacoat jacket. And if you kind of make eye contact with him, he will stop you and he will say something to the effect of, would you be willing to hear about how Passover is a core to something, something, something? I tuned him out at that point. I've met him 4 times. He doesn't remember me, obviously, because he keeps stopping me, and I'm not particularly susceptible to new religious movements. They're out of Korea, right? He'll show you this little pamphlet, and there's like a church with Korean writing. And, I think you might know them. They used to be like in Hub, and then campus security kicked them out. They'll say, this is God as mother. They're weird. I'm sorry if you're part of that group. Amongst other things, right, you pool your financial resources, right? So all your money you're supposed to give to this particular church. They have housing that you're supposed to go live in, all this sort of weird stuff. And it's based in this church in South Korea. And it's like God has been reborn as a Korean woman. And that's part of the claim of this new religious movement, right? And somehow they've done well enough that they've spread to Edmonton, Alberta, and other places around the world, right? And you can find them pretty easily if you look, but don't. Do not go hang out with them. Inevitably, well, I am immune to new religious movements. I don't know if you are. And the more time you spend with people in new religious movements, the more you're at risk of joining them. So, unless you're very secure, don't go looking for them. Don't hang out with them as a thought experiment because, I don't want you to join a cult. That's not the goal. Unless it's mine and you're giving me all your money. But I haven't created it yet. So, all right. Okay, interesting. Good questions. Okay, so was Christianity becoming a thing? People were bored with Judaism. All right, so I have time. I only have like 3 slides left, so I will answer this question in a little bit of detail. Well, I'll answer some of these before. I'll clear it. This is my favorite comment. I'm going to leave it here so I can take a snapshot of it later. What is Jehovah's Witness classified? So I think, Jehovah's Witnesses would be classified as a sect, right? They're a Christian sect. They share most of their beliefs with mainstream Christianity. They have a couple of major differences. For one, they think that the true name of God is Jehovah. They think that, and there's a bunch of things about blood transfusions and medical care, and some other things like, I'm trying to remember the Jehovah's Witnesses, that the Christian church has long mistranslated the opening of the Gospel of John. In the beginning there was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. They think it should be translated as was a God, so that Jesus is like a minor God below God. Anyway, that's way too into details. But it's basically just a kind of sect that spun off of Christianity, and it's starting that process a while ago of getting more institutionalized. Okay, so this is a really interesting question. So would Buddhism be counted as a new religious movement? So Buddhism is definitely a religion now. Buddhism obviously is very, very old. It's older, I believe, than Christianity, certainly older than Islam. So it's a very, very old religion. It might be about the same age as Judaism, but I can't remember the exact date of its founding. So it's definitely a religion. But you've had sects of Buddhism spin off all over the place, right? And Buddhism has also tended to take on I guess it started as kind of a sect of Hinduism, right? Because, the Buddha initially was Hindu, and it's kind of spun off of Hinduism, but that was thousands of years ago. So today, Buddhism is definitely a religion in and of itself. It maybe went through that sect path, and now it has just become a proper religion. All right, I really like this question. It's actually really interesting. I've got lots of time for my last couple of slides. So this is probably, all right, there's a whole book about this. And it's by Rodney Stark, and he's my favorite. And I'll tell you about it very briefly, and then I will say that if you want to learn more about it, I talk about it in huge and great detail in SOS 376, Sociology of Religion. It's offered in the fall. So come take more classes with me if you haven't had enough of me by now. If you too learn to not stop at traffic lights at 3 a.m., I can teach you more things, I promise. Okay, so the argument that Stark makes in The Rise of Christianity, and it's not universally accepted, was that one of the reasons that Christianity succeeded so wildly and probably went from about 100 people in 33 AD to, the dominant religion of the Roman Empire a mere 3 centuries later, does have a lot to do with this same kind of process. So it starts as a sect of Judaism, right? All of the initial Christian followers were all Jewish. And basically, they now had this new stuff that they, this Jesus person who they tacked on to Judaism. And it was really attractive, partially because there were a lot of Jews living around the Mediterranean basin, right? As far away as Spain, right, from the Holy Land, and Morocco on the, in the North African part of the Roman Empire. And a lot of them were Greek speaking, they didn't speak Hebrew or Aramaic, and they wanted more integration into Roman society, especially dropping things like some of the kosher laws, right? So you wouldn't have to keep kosher under Christianity. You could eat bacon, which I think most of us can agree is absolutely the best thing in the world. So eating bacon, and a lot of the other laws that kept Jews separate from Roman society. So a lot of disaffected Jews would have joined Christianity for that, and it had the added advantage, and this is where new religious movements tend to succeed, is when they graft on something new to something that already exists, right? So basically, Christianity was Judaism plus Jesus. And so you didn't have to say, I'm not Jewish anymore. You can just say, oh, Jesus is the Jewish Messiah. Yay. I'm still Jewish, but now I acknowledge this other guy. Also, I can eat bacon now. So a BLT can totally be a thing, except it couldn't because tomatoes come from the New World, and that wouldn't happen until, at least the 17th century. But you could have had a BL. That's it. Bacon and lettuce, right? So you could have had a bacon lettuce, which is still worth it, but the tomato really sells it. Okay. So there's that, right? And the same thing with Mormonism, right? Or Latter-day Saints. The Latter-day Saints are Christianity plus all the Joseph Smith stuff. So you're not creating a whole new religion, you're just asking people to adopt this extra thing on top of the religion. And that's where new religious movements tend to do really well. So yeah, in a sense, Christianity, became a thing because people were dissatisfied with some of what it meant to be Jewish, but didn't want to give up their Jewishness completely. Okay. All right, I think I'm on my last couple of slides here. All right, so what does the religious landscape look like in Canada specifically? And here, one of the big things that people are talking about now is the growth of a group called the Nuns. And I can write it on the screen so you don't get it confused with this one, because they are not the same. The Nuns, or no religion, sometimes nothing in particular. And you see it on this chart. So basically, the Canadian landscape has been shifting really majorly for decades, but the biggest shift has happened between 2001 and the 2021 census. So they only ask religious questions every 10 years on the census. So every 10 years, we get a kind of an update on what has been going on, what the religious landscape in Canada is. And so what do we see? So if we go back to 2001, almost 80% of Canadians said they were Christian, and that number has been declining steadily. Right now, it is just over half, right, that say they are Christian. Other religions, specifically, if we look at it, it's these three. Muslim, Hindu, and Sikh have all been growing, at great paces, right? The growth between, you're talking about almost 1 million people added here, 400,000 here, and 300,000 here in a 10-year period, right? So they're growing really, really quickly, mostly through immigration, and basically all the Christian denominations are shrinking. Catholic down 10% in 10 years. United Church, this used to be like the second biggest church in Canada, about 18% if you went back to the 1970s, and today it sits at 3.1, and I look forward to the day where you can no longer measure the United Church because there's simply not enough of them. I don't know why I look forward to that, but it's going to happen probably in the next 10 years, 20 years at the outside. But all the kind of Christian denominations except for Orthodox and other Christian, which, again, is an interesting one. This is probably non-denominational Christianity, are all shrinking. And the big growth, has been no religion, right? Which, went from, 15% in 2001, and today sits at 34%. So that people who express no religion would be the single largest religious group in Canada. Now, some of this is atheist. Some of it is agnostic. But the biggest chunk of it is what I call meh. Just don't care, right? Just religiously don't care at all. When you ask them, "What are you, an atheist?" Nah. Are you an agnostic? What? It's like, so what do you think about religion? Meh. That's pretty much the big chunk of the no religion is what you call nuns or nothing in particular. They just don't care enough about religion to even make a claim. Okay. Oh my God, I'm just reading a book about this, but I'm not done. Sorry. Is Islam and the outlier of Abrahamic religions? Because not many people were Christian or Jewish in Arabia. Super, super complicated question. My understanding is the origins of Islam are a little bit fuzzy, but I can't honestly, I'm just reading a book on this, so I can't answer this. Definitely as Islam goes through the Middle East and North Africa, right, it's converting a lot of people who are Christian and Jewish. So there's a lot of conversion happening, again, people being added to Islam. But I'm reading a book, and I just got to the kind of slow motion collapse of the Byzantine and the Persian empires, and I haven't quite gotten to the rise of Islam yet. So I can't answer this question fully. Okay, I think this is that's my last slide. Okay, and just kind of looking, again, these are the same numbers, and I stole these from Sarah Wilkin-Laflamme at Waterloo, because she does this, and she visualized it, and she put it on Twitter, so they were too good not to steal. And you can just kind of see, right, Catholics, if we look at 1971, almost half the population of Canada was Catholic, now it's less than a third. The United Church, almost a fifth of Canadians, it's down to 3%. And we see, Muslims rising from 1% in 1991, when they show up in the sample big enough to be not just other religion. And then same with Hindus and Sikhs, right? All growing kind of at mass pace. So the religious landscape of Canada, and this is true more of Canada than say the US, it's a very different place, is changing wildly. But the big story is this: no religion, and that's the same in the US as well. Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry I can't answer that question better. If I'd just read a little bit more of that book, I think I'd have a good answer for you. But so far, no. All right, that is it. We're done 10 minutes early. So that is the content for the course. I'm not going to introduce another subject with one class left. So come back on Wednesday. We're going to be doing review, right? So we'll do Q&A and Kahoot quiz, and probably Friday's class we're just going to cancel because we ran out of content. I'm sure you're all heartbroken beyond words to have one less class, but try to contain your tears. All right, we'll see you on Wednesday.